Let's see. All right. We should be live. Thank you so much, Veronica, for the music interlude as we got started there. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another video with me, Ben Rojan, aka the Seattle Data Guy. Joining me today is Veronica from Fivetran. Thank you so much for joining us, Veronica.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you again. So just as a quick background for everyone to kind of get to know Veronica well, Veronica works at Fivetran as a principal product manager. She's basically responsible for the entire analytics roadmap as well as the execution of that roadmap. And she's basically been scaling out the team over the past few months, helping it scale from 10 to 20 people. And originally, she kind of started her whole career as an options trader at JP Morgan, and then eventually started kind of going into the whole analytical stack route as she kind of started getting curious about how data plays a role in the overall enterprise. Is there anything else I can add to that, or is that pretty accurate?
That was pretty accurate.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. Well, just to kind of get things started with some light icebreakers, let's just get some little bit more understanding of who you are. So pumpkin spice or regular coffee?
I actually drink tea.
Okay, or tea. Tea's also good. What book are you currently reading right now?
I'm reading Daniel Pink's Drive. It talks about what motivates humans.
Well, I will have to pick that one up. And then where are you going to try to travel first as soon as you can and you feel comfortable?
I will go back to China because that's where I'm from. All my families are there, and I haven't seen them over the past year because of the pandemic. So I'll go home first.
That makes sense. Yes, I have a few friends who are definitely waiting on a similar thing. Okay, finally, just because, again, we're all being forced to cook at home, and some of us were spoiled and didn't have to do that for a real long time. What's for dinner tonight?
What's for dinner tonight? I'm actually making some salmons tonight. Ooh. Yeah, yes, salmon and grilled vegetables. That's kind of my go-to dish.
That's perfect. No, I love salmon, being from the Northwest. So I think I grew up on that. No, great. Now that we've kind of got a little more about you, let's start focusing more on, data products, scaling data teams. And just to kind of start out with this whole thing, how do you get to manage a data product?
So as you kind of mentioned, I actually started off my career as an option trader at JP Morgan. And while I was a trader, I was initially really impressed by how sophisticated the trading systems are and how quantitative the day-to-day work that was. And I think because the system is very mature, very sophisticated, and in a 3-person team, we're making 50 to 100 million revenue a year, and traders could be really much focused on how to improve the modeling and how to make more money. So back then there wasn't a focus on data yet. And I initiated a project where we collecting customer data, instrument that, transform that and turn that into useful market insights for us to trade better and monetize from these insights. And that's kind of what got me pivoted from trading to data. And I went on to build the first analytics stack for JP Morgan, where we started to centralize all the data in one place and extract insights from that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think so. You kind of got introduced to it more from like kind of a need aspect, like where you're kind of like just as part of it. So I guess it's like kind of as you're building out that kind of a product, what were kind of, did you notice that there was things that you kind of needed and you were hoping that you kind of were running into problems, I guess is my point here. And kind of some of what were the major pain points you were running into while you're trying to develop this data product?
What were the main points? Or talking about the data products at JP Morgan? Or
I think in general, right? So as you're trying to build out this data product, or just data stack in general, like you're probably realizing that there were certain things that were difficult to do along the way.
I would actually characterize this in 2 ways, because for anyone to build data products, on one hand, you start with operational systems, because the goal is to extract data and replicate data from operational systems into a centralized data warehouse. So you start with the operational system, and on the other hand, that's your centralized data warehouse. And everything in between, you have to go through this life cycle of data management to replicate, transform data, and have tools around building insights and have tools to look for insights very easily. And with this kind of concept in mind, I actually see different type of companies have different type of pinpoints. For example, the very established large enterprises like JP Morgan, they have very mature operational systems. Right? The data coming out of the systems are pretty much clean, organized with high data quality, with great reference data that's readily available. But a pain for these large enterprises is on the infrastructure. Like how can these large enterprises move well to adopt a modern data stack? Because a lot of them might be on-prem, right? If you're on-prem, that you're experiencing a scaling and performance problem when you're dealing with very, very, very large quantity of data. Besides the scaling, data engineering could be a problem. When I was at JP Morgan, I spent 6 months waiting for data engineering to build customized pipelines for me to build insights. It overall took me about 9 to 12 months to stumble upon success and build very useful insights for the business. But more than half of that was me waiting for data. So I think for large enterprises, it's the infrastructure that could be a problem because they often are slow in adopting modern data tools. On the other hand, in the startup world, in the kind of the growth and commercial sector, you have all these newer, smaller companies that are very agile in building data tools and adopting these cloud native data products. But then your operational system might not be stable because you're a building company and you need to set up a robust, scalable, reliable operational system for you to produce robust data into your cloud data warehouse. And when your company strategy, especially for Fivetran, we're a unicorn company that's scaling really fast every year, we had to work with a lot of the system issues because the company is new. So I would broadly categorize these as the 2 pinpoints. And then in your path of moving data from operational system to your centralized warehouse, there are a lot of kind of pinpoints in between. How do you ingest data? How do you transform data? How do you build easy to use insights? And how do you do data governance? And how do you do data discovery? And I would say these are the universal problems that any organization will encounter.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's very similar to what I see consulting wise, and I think I apologize as a data engineer for all the time you have to wait. We're trying really hard, and I feel like it's a constant thing that I hear across companies and industries, right? Like we're just stuck waiting for data. So I think like, that was kind of like the pain point that came to you, right? Like as we've talked, like at JP Morgan, like it was always waiting for the data. So how did that kind of lead you, I guess, to Fivetran, and kind of what was that like aha moment where you're like, maybe Fivetran is kind of this one possible solution that could help kind of solve some of this?
Yeah, being the data owner and the product owner who's responsible for delivering insights to the business, I was personally frustrated that I couldn't deliver things faster. And I personally find data engineering to be one of the biggest limiting factor of us delivering insights to users faster. I think that's what motivated me to start researching in the market to see what are the technologies out there that will enable us to do data engineering and build data pipeline faster. And that's how I stumbled upon Fivetran. Fivetran has a laser focus on building managed data pipelines. With Fivetran, you can move data from source system into destination in a matter of days rather than weeks and months. And that's how I discovered Fivetran. And I end up being so impressed by the mission of the company that I end up working for Fivetran.
Well,
Yeah.
that's probably good endorsement one way or the other. Okay, just because it was more of a fun question. Does Fivetran use Fivetran, since you're saying you're dealing with all these problems
What do
at
you
Fivetran?
think?
I assume you do, but it's just one of those. It's like, I think it's a great.
We actually have over 135 active connectors that we use that are built by Fivetran that is connecting to the production, that's connecting to our production Postgres database, connecting to Salesforce, Zendesk, G Sheet, GitHub, Segment. So we actually use that as our way of syncing all the data from data sources into our cloud data warehouse. I think a testament to that is in our 20-person data team, we actually don't have a data engineer because we hire analysts with SQL skills and they set up these connectors using Fivetran. And that typically is a matter of hours and days versus weeks and months.
Yeah, no, I think that's. I mean, I assumed you guys did, but I think it's a fun question to think about. Do companies use their own products inside? I mean, I highly doubt. Actually, I'm curious. I wonder if there are any Mac laptops at Microsoft at all. I think there's a few. All right, so kind of with that, right? Like companies, I think, are often kind of being turned to this concept of this modern data stack and to solve a lot of these problems that we're running into, you talked about earlier. So what do you think like the modern data stack kind of means, and why is it kind of becoming so popular, I think, in probably the last year or two?
What does modern data stack means? I think of modern data stack as a suite of cloud native data tools that are designed to automate, provide ease of use, and provide lower cost to companies that help companies manage data better. And in order to talk about why this is happening now, I think it's probably also useful to talk a little bit about the history of what triggered all of these innovation. And I think back in 2012, the emergence of cloud data warehouse like Redshift, that's kind of a pivotal release for a lot of the data tools that happen now, because that's for the first time companies can manage large amount of data in scale in lower cost than the traditional method. And because of this innovation, you see a lot of new data products emerge. For example, the more cloud data warehouse like Snowflake, BigQuery emerged from that. And then there are BI tools like Looker and Tableau who are connected and query these cloud data warehouse directly. And we start to see data transformation tools like dbt that is using SQL language to transform data. And then there's a whole swarm of data governance and data discovery tools that are happening. I think what's really special about these modern data stack is for the first time, we're seeing all of these services, they are designed and to work together to help companies solve data problems for the first time. And a fun fact, the CEO of Accenture actually mentioned that the last 2 years, the 90% of the data was actually produced in the last 2 years, and only 1% of the data has been utilized. So I think there's just, with the emergence of these tools and technologies, you really start to see companies start utilizing these technologies.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that I'm realizing on a daily basis, just in terms of the fact that it's not just like the size of the data, but like you said 135 connectors right at Fivetran that you guys are using, and you're a small company. Well, I mean, small relative, right? Like obviously, yes,
very small company. We have 500 people.
I mean, that's like versus tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands for other companies. And they're having to, I mean, imagine the amount of data systems they're dealing with, custom data solutions that you're still going to need data engineers to pull from, because you don't have necessarily everything with Fivetran and everything in the modern data stack. So I think that's a great point. It's just like there's just so much that's like, yeah, I think tools like Fivetran and other similar, things in the modern day stack are just trying to help alleviate a lot of that stress, because we can no longer manually scale this with like makeshift pipelines where we're just kind of sticking stuff together. And it really needs to be more of a centralized system rather than, again, lots of little components that are everywhere. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Just going on that, like, going away from like the like product, right? Like there's definitely a lot of like modern day stack components. The other obviously half of all of this is making sure you find the right people that can utilize these products, right? Like you said earlier, you're finding analysts that know SQL, which is, I think, definitely more of a modern thing where it's more of an expectation these days, but it's still very hard to do, right? Like finding people that are very good at SQL, finding people that are very like data centric and have that data mindset. So how do you kind of deal with that? Like, what are you looking for in general in a data professional?
What do I look for in a data professional? I will share my ideal criteria for data professional, and I would kind of preference this with the fact that we're very lucky, because Fivetran is the innovator in modern data tools. We have the luxury of asking for a lot from a data professional, and we have kind of the luxury of hiring for them. I think of this as soft skills and technical skills. In terms of technical skills, I look at two pillars. On one hand is the data skills, the technical data skills. Can you code? Can you do SQL really well? Can you do visualization and BI tools? And on the other hand is your business domain knowledge. Because for a data professional to be successful, they need to have enough business intuition to solve the problem using data. That means that whether we might need them to have product analytics experience or marketing analytics experience, because having these business domain knowledge will help them become a more effective data problem solvers. On the soft skill side, we really value the spark. Like, how passionate are you in using data to solve these system issues? I think that's really what differentiates a star performer with kind of your average data professionals, because people with spark, they take initiative, they're independent, they are creative, and they take a lot of ownership in what they do. And I think in a longer term, that character and trait really stood out. The other side of soft skill is communication skill. Part of being a data professional is solving problems for people, and having that communication skill and the ability to engage with either stakeholders and end users is also very valuable.
Yeah, I think that's like kind of an interesting skill you sometimes may pick up or may not pick up, especially if you're like on the data engineering side, but like trying to figure out both the communication aspect of it as well as like understanding the business, which I think has always constantly been the disconnect, I think, between like engineers and analysts. Like there's always this like you say, one of the reasons I often find it takes 6 months, it's like you ask engineer for data set A, they come back to you 3 months later, it's not perfect. They come back, then you tell them to fix it a month later, and then by the time it's fixed again, it's like 6 months. So it's always interesting trying to bridge that gap. So I can definitely see why, like, trying to like cut out the whole conversation if you can, and just like let the person that understands what data they're looking for and understands the business, rather than like having this weird kind of conversation constantly having go on. It can be very helpful. But also in terms of like finding a good data professional, it's like very important that, again, they're very technical, at least in terms of like SQL, but also at least have some soft skills as part of that. With that being said, I think there's a lot of skills that people are being asked to have these days. So do you often maybe look for more like archetypes of personalities? Like, does someone have to be like an amazing person in all of these? Or do you often find that like maybe there's some skills that kind of clump together in certain kind of groups?
That's a really great question. I think the traditional way of approaching managing or scaling a team is you think about different archetype of roles. For example, data engineer, data analyst, product managers, solution architect, and data scientist. However, I think about this more from a skill perspective. What are the skills that we need to hire for the team? And what sort of skills can be outsourced through buying tools and third-party tools that allow us to kind of replace that human skill? And what are the skills that are more uniquely human, and how can we kind of set a team up for success? And the skills that I'm looking for in a data team, the number one is SQL. SQL is increasingly became the data modeling, and now these days through the introduction of dbt, the transformation language also. And typically it takes a person between 6 months to a year to get really good at it. So that's kind of a core skill that we really look for. Analytic skill is what we also look for. Can a person critically think about a problem and solve the problem in a very analytical way? That's kind of the core skill set that you typically look for in a data analyst type of roles. Another very important skill is building the infrastructure. That's kind of your data engineer type of role and what they offer. However, with the products such as Fivetran and Stitch and all of these data ingestion tools, you actually don't need to hire a data engineer because you can completely outsource that part of the data stack to these third-party tools. In our team, as an example, we don't have a data engineer. It's this year that we're starting to hire a data architect because analysts can use these tools to set up data pipelines very easily. Now, the next one is when you have all these data sources available, you have tools to set them up, you actually need an architect type of skill set to put a structure on your cloud data warehouse to make your data easily discoverable and navigable. So I do think there's some skill set needed in terms of architecting your infrastructure. Followed by that is the PM skills. Because you're delivering data products for either internal users or external users, you need PM skills for the team to collect requirement, run the prioritization, and communicate with stakeholders and doing project management. Different companies may approach this different ways. Some companies may hire a PM. Some other companies kind of just train the managers and analysts in having these skills. So I think it can be accomplished in different ways depending on the stage, the maturity, and the size of the team. And lastly is the prediction skills. Analysts is more about solving and answer questions about what has happened. You also need data scientists and that sort of prediction skill to figure out what would happen in the future to help you manage your business more proactively.
Yeah, it's there's a long list. So I guess my big point there was like, for anyone out there who finds it daunting when you look at all the skill sets, it's like I think you nailed it on the head. SQL is generally where I think a lot of people start, right? Like if you have good SQL skills, a lot of the other stuff can come later. Like if you want to learn pandas, like if you understand SQL, learning that's kind of second, it becomes very clear, I think. So I think it was good that you kind of point out that, SQL is still this very important language of data, and it doesn't get discussed enough. Let's see. Oh, okay. So kind of like based on that, like, hiring is obviously one major problem that you'll deal with. It's hard to find the right people, but what are kind of the other challenges that you faced while trying to scale a data team?
I think when you're trying, the point of scaling a data team is to develop the team fast enough and efficient enough that can keep up with the growth of the organization. I think one of the biggest issue that we encountered during my early time at Fivetran was we started off the organization design with a distributed model where we have some core analysts that are responsible for managing the pipeline and transforming data and improve the data from raw data to model data. And then we have a few distributed analysts who are embedded in different organizations, such as product analysts, sales analysts. And what we realized that is this sort of distributed model is actually not very efficient when you wanted to scale the organization very quickly, because having such non-centralized model will often occur misalignment in terms of strategy and execution. Another way to look at this is the whole point of building a data stack is to centralize all the data into one place. And when you don't have a centralized team that enable that, it also kind of defeats the purpose of building a centralized data stack. So that's a huge pain point that we encountered when I first joined Fivetran. And over the last 6 months, we work to move that to a centralized model where we have centralized philosophy, centralized way of managing strategy and execution across all departments.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. It is kind of always, I think, the challenge. It's like what's the proper way to set up a team? Do you think, I guess, in this case, do you think if you were to continue scaling, it would still be feasible to kind of have more of a centralized structure? Or like, let's say you took that to like 10,000 people. Do you still view this being effective? Or do you think like once you start getting that big, then you start needing more of those people kind of embedded per team?
I can see us switching to a centralized, decentralized model very similar to Facebook, because it's very difficult to manage kind of 100-person org, right? At some point, when your organization hits maybe over 20,000 people, there might be a need for a different approach. However, there's still kind of that hardcore need of having a centralized team who's responsible for managing all the data, keeping that in one place, and keeping a standard for data governance, and who's responsible for making access to data easy. I still see that as a core centralized function that needs to be there. Once you have a massive enterprise, I wouldn't be surprised that different organizations have their own analysts to work hand in hand with the organization to do ad hoc analyses. I even see in the future, maybe in 10 years, half of employees, the office employees, may even know SQL, because in the previous decades is knowing Excel and VBA really well. Maybe in 10 years, it's half of your employees know SQL. So I think the future can look very different once all the organizations finish the deployment of modern data stack.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense. I guess that kind of brings this to from the very highest level. It's like, if you're basically trying to convince your CEO, hey, everyone, or half the people should know SQL, right? And it's like, why, kind of, right? So the question here being, how do we convince, I guess, CEOs and directors to basically invest in data? Like, how do you do that, and how should other people kind of try to do that if they're in their companies and trying to drive change through data?
I would even reframe this as, what would you lose if you don't invest in data? The most influential company, like tech companies of today, Google's mission is about how to help people find information faster. And Facebook monetized by utilizing data and sell ads to people. Like, data is an very integral part of today's world. If companies are not investing in data, I think they're facing the odds of survival, because all other companies are adopting data, trying to make data-driven decisions, trying to do predictive analyses, trying to understand what happened better. So if all other companies are doing this and you're not doing this, then I don't think the company can stand against the competitiveness of this global environment where all the companies are adopting these technologies.
Yeah, I think that's one. Oh, good.
One thing that was really inspiring, I participated in a data conference, and I remember the CEO of Instacart mentioned half of the company knows SQL, and I was really impressed because Instacart is not even a data company, right? It's a delivery slash tech company, and I was just really impressed by the vision that the CEO has. Like we wanted to hire independent, curious people, and we wanted to empower them with data and empower them to have the autonomy of using data to do their job well. And for for a CEO to have that vision, I think is just very forward thinking, and I can see more companies going towards that direction.
Yeah, I think if I don't do you know anything about Popsicle or Popsequel, whatever you want to call it? I think if I recall, the people who set that up were from Instacart, and that might have been like the reason they like set up that startup, because they were like they were trying to make basically SQL more collaborative, where everyone could comment on that. So I don't know if you know about that startup, but if I recall, that was like where they came from. They came from Instacart, and that was kind of their idea.
I need to look into that.
Yeah, so they basically kind of try to create something like the Google Sheets or Google Docs, so like everyone can collaborate and make comments on SQL on kind of one editor, so that way the product manager can come in, and that's kind of their theory. Their whole concept is like, oh, like everyone should understand SQL to some degree, so that everyone's making data-driven decisions. So I think that's
yeah, because this is a really good point. It goes back to how do we reduce the cost of people being more data informed, right? On one hand of the puzzle is how do we as data professionals, practitioners, product managers build features and systems that allow people to navigate information better. On the other side of coin is how do you upskill your employees to upskill them in terms of knowing SQL, because when these two are merged, you're basically extracting a lot of productivity from that.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I think that's probably a lot of what, like, right, Fivetran, a lot of the modern data stack is trying to do, right? Like, reduce some of the technical barriers to entry. So, reduce the amount of code. And then, like you said, on the other side is like, if you can just get people to understand SQL to a certain degree, then you've almost met somewhere in the middle, right? Like there's still some gaps, right? But there's definitely a lot of that middle ground covered. So yeah, that's definitely a lot of what I see and a lot of the helpfulness that I think a lot of these tools have. What is it? Someone commented, I think Denzel was like, wow, so data engineers are obsolete. And I'm like, I still don't see that happening for a long time. I also foresee, again, like having all the custom connectors and there's like, it's very difficult to manage and maintain all of them. And so oftentimes I assume companies like Fivetran will just try to get like the 80% kind of those pipelines, and then maybe 20% will still be data engineers. You also brought up earlier about like data governance and like data infrastructure or architecture still kind of being a valid component. I think more than anything, you'll just see data engineers being able to focus more on providing more value through integration, like developing integrations through different data sets, and spending less time having to be like, oh, I need to add this one column. Oh, I need to add this one table. Oh, I need to like do all this like little operational stuff just to maintain everything. So yeah, I think
I actually think this concept of believing data engineers become obsolete is actually that common myth, and I would love to debunk it. I think in this case is more about the majority of this goes back to the operational system. The majority of the operational system in today's day and age are SaaS applications.
Yeah.
Right. And then you have a small amount of on-premise database that are storing some key production data. And when you have that hundreds and thousands of SaaS applications, in this case, what data integrators like Fivetran and Stitch are doing is automating that process of moving data from these existing SaaS applications to a warehouse. Essentially, if millions of companies are using these thousands of SaaS applications, there isn't a lot of point in having every single company building their own customized pipelines.
Yeah.
Because when essentially you are migrating these type of data engineering to a few companies who specialize it and do it really well, because the data engineering often has a lot of corner cases. And then we're really freeing the valuable time that your data engineer has on some other customized use case, which has been what you're working on, right? Instead of solving a problem that could have been solved by an entity, you're solving more interesting problems instead of these standardized operational system to cloud data warehouse type of problems.
Yeah, and that's what I foresee. So I think that's like one of the initial reactions people get when they hear about this. But I'm like, I'm excited. If I don't have to write another Salesforce connector, custom code wise, like great. It's like if it can just like get pulled in there, and then I can, there's still so much work that needs to be done afterwards. I think it's one of those things where it's like there's a lot of other work that gets done besides just connecting to a data source. So yeah, I'm definitely more on the excited side than anything else. Of having to simplify some of my work. Yeah. So that was kind of the core of my questions for this specific discussion. Does anyone else live have any questions that you want to ask Veronica while she's here? Again, she's got a wealth of knowledge and is also very organized. This is definitely one of the most prepared talks I think I've had for another person. So it was great. So if anyone has any questions, just feel free to ping them in and we can kind of share them. I guess while we wait, I don't know. Any exciting announcements for Fivetran? We'll give it a second.
Fivetran, we actually just had an internal announcement. We acquired another small company who's focusing on replicating database. Essentially, we are upgrading our technology in helping companies replicate data from databases into their cloud data warehouse. So that's really exciting. We are constantly innovating and thinking of new ways of making replication of data faster, better, more reliable.
Yeah, that's right. I think I just saw that this morning on LinkedIn. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, we have one question. It's kind of broad, but I'll show it. So the question is, how does Python skills fit into the picture in terms of like marketable skills in the future?
Python is always one of the most marketable skills. I think, if anything, Ben, you should be more qualified to answer this question than I am.
Yeah, no, I think in terms of like in terms of Python, like it's just so broad. Like it's one of those things that's like, I almost break Python skills into like 3 or 4 general categories. You have analytical skills where you have like things like pandas and data science type things, like scikit-learn. So those are like their own skill sets, right? Because you have to have like applied knowledge of how to use that. You've got like kind of data engineering and automation skills like Airflow and Luigi. So that's more like data pipelining. You have things like developing APIs. So I still do a lot of like API development using like Flask or something. So Python's like just so broad that yeah, it's definitely a huge skill if you can apply it. I think again the question becomes where do you want to apply it? Do you foresee using it as a data engineer? I think yeah, that will still be a necessary thing in the future. Do you want to apply it using it as an analyst? I personally, is like when it comes to analytically, I prefer using SQL versus Python. Like I know a lot of people like I'll talk to them like, oh, I use pandas to like do this stuff. I'm like, oh, you could just write it in SQL, but that's one of those things that some people just prefer. And then yeah, if you're a programmer, then I mean yeah, it's a great tool in your toolbox always. Okay, here I'll bring up this one. Is more for you. What are the advantages Fivetran has over its competitors?
That's a great question. I think of it. I want to go back to this concept of modern data stack and what is really. It's not just besides kind of the aspect of data integration. What do you care about when you select a modern data stack? You want automation, right? Because you don't want to manually write scripts to do these data replications. You want lower cost, and then you want ease of use. I think these are the concepts I personally care about when I curate a modern data stack for all tools, not just data ingestion tools. And I think these are where Fivetran has competitive advantage on. For example, ease of use. Using my team as an example, we don't have a data engineer. We have analysts who knows how to do SQL, they go to Fivetran's UI and they can already start setting up 135 data connectors. I think that ease of use really matters. The second is automation. And I think this is where all companies are trying to market their product. And I think if you are trying to select vendor product, you need to be really careful because all data integration company will tell you that they do automation, but not company actually does the intricacy really well. For example, when you add a column, right? When you change the column type, all of these schema change actually will affect your replication of data. And Fivetran have considered these corner cases, and we have built-in features that automate that. Because I remember when I was at JP Morgan, I had to coordinate with upstream whenever there's a new adding columns, changing columns, and I had to work with our data engineers to build a framework and abstraction that allows us to automatically take in these changes. So I'd say the automation is the second piece besides ease of use. And the third one is just the breadth of connectors. There are thousands of SaaS applications out there, and I personally believe Fivetran has the biggest breadth of connectors besides the fact that we're reliable. Because ideally you want to use one tool, and that tool is the Amazon of your connectors, right? You can shop for every new application, for every new database that you use for a company. There's that one-stop shop that you can use. And I personally think that's Fivetran's competitive advantage because we were the first company that's doing this. We just have more time in developing more connectors than other companies.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting you bring up the whole like changing columns and data types. That is it's one of those deceptively simple things that it can take a month or more. Like it's like, oh, we just need to change this data type. It's like, okay, is it in 100 different places? It's going to take you some time. You got to talk to all the teams. They got to find time. And then, yeah, like you said, like suddenly it's a whole project just to change a column or name or a data type. I think I've seen like misspellings and people be like, oh, we need to change this. And everyone's like, nah, we'll leave it misspelled for history.
If you're selecting tools and if you're doing POC of different vendors, and that's kind of where you need to be careful, you should test for that to see how robust the vendors are for your use case.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. All right, the next two questions are a little more, I think, data engineering. Like, do you use Airflow? I don't know if that's more general. I imagine you guys don't use Airflow for anything.
No, we don't use Airflow, but you should be familiar. What is the question here?
Oh, it just says, do you use Airflow? That is the question. So I was like, well, I mean, I use it, but it's very broad. There's another question about what effect does the lack of experience in a data engineering role have on hiring process, but I'm not sure if they mean like how difficult it is to get hired with a lack of experience in data engineering, which is the only thing I can assume. It's not super clear.
So the question
here, let me show it to you.
What effects does lack of experience in the data engineering role have on hiring process? I assume this is asking if you don't have enough experience in data engineer and you wanted to get hired, how does that affect you?
Yeah.
This is actually a really good question, and I think it goes beyond just the data engineer role, right? It's really if you believe I don't have enough experience, but I wanted to go for either a data role or other role, how does that affect you? There are two ways to think about this. On one hand, it's understandable as a hiring manager, a hiring manager always prefer to hire a perfect candidate, right? That has that perfect experience, but in reality, it's not always realistic. From a candidate point of view, I personally believe that drive and passion and that spark matters more than your experience. Because when I first pivoted my career from trading to data, I actually didn't know anything about data. I didn't know anything about coding, about tech process, about how to use BI tools, about using SQL. I think what I kind of what I was able to add value immediately is my business domain knowledge. So I kind of pick up these skills along the line. I think if you don't have enough experience, the best thing you could do is pick up a project in your current work environment that allow you to exercise the skills, because then you're building a very persuasive case for yourself in front of hiring managers that demonstrate that not only you have drive, you also have the ability to execute on your drive, even if it's just a project that you've done. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you've got a good example of like that whole moving laterally component where it's like, you were a trader and then you're like, oh, but I want to do this, analytical component, data product management. So you kind of pushed into that, and then from there that got you to Fivetran. So I think that's a great testament to like, yeah, it's possible. It is always hard to push that skill gap, but I have to say that's something similar that I think I did myself, where it was like, I was more of an analyst and I was like, oh, I want to do data engineering. So, you just push into that project, and then from there you get hired at like a startup or something. And then from there you can, then you've got the experience. And especially at a startup where you're going to, I'm sure you're learning way more about being a product manager, broadly speaking, than you would, in a large company where it's like, okay, you're a product manager, but you really just manage this one feature on this product, right? Rather than the whole roadmap. So I think that's also probably a lot of fun for you.
Yeah, I believe that you can do it. You just need to do some POC, do some projects to prove that you can do that.
Oh, here's at least a Fivetran one. Can I write a custom connector in Fivetran, for example, to an on-prem data source?
Can I write a customer connector? So you can definitely write a custom connector, because sometimes we don't have connector for everything, and then you can use Cloud Function to write some custom connector. In terms of to an on-prem data source, I'm not the expert in our product, but I would think the question for that is yes, because we have this customer. I recently read a use case. We have this customer, Old Castle. They use Fivetran to did a one-off migration to move data from on-prem to their cloud data warehouse. And then once that migration was over, they continued to use Fivetran to migrate it, data from operational system to cloud. So based on my shallow experience, I think it's yes, but I would love to kind of get your contact information, confirm my understanding, so that I'm not falsely advertising here.
That's cool. I'm curious if they also kind of are referring to the fact, like, could you, like, if you make a custom connector, could you then like hook it up to Fivetran as more of like the infrastructure component as well, so like it can track it, which would be interesting. Does Fivetran have an API that you could do that?
Do what?
Like essentially, like if I were to build like something like a Google function or something, where it could tell me if it like fired every day or something, or if it loaded data.
We does that. Even my team,
okay.
Right, use Cloud Functions to write some customer connectors hosted on Fivetran. So it's
okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's perfect. Okay, that looks like the questions that they all had to ask. I don't know if you have any final. Oh wait, I'm curious. All right, do you view this is interesting? I guess. Okay. Do you view the shift towards more remote work as a positive, negative, and neutral thing in the data space?
What is the angle here? I'd love to learn a bit more angle. Like, are we talking about how the shift towards remote work affect the pace of innovation, or are we really, or what is the angle here?
Well, we can wait for that, and you can quickly answer this question instead. Fivetran supports a lot of. Oh, you can read it.
I know we have. So first of all, I'm the PM analytics team, so I'm not the all know it all of Fivetran products. So I have to kind of double check of my understanding here. But I know that we have pretty great tight partnership with Databricks and other vendors. So I think there's a lot to come out from there. And I would need to double check on our product roadmap to see what the achievement we have so far and what a plan we have there.
And then for the angle was productivity and collaboration. So how has that affected productivity and how has that affected productivity and collaboration in terms of working in data? Personally, I imagine it's about the same as everything else, but I guess
Right.
if you've got something else to add.
Yeah, I don't see this as particularly a data space thing. It seems more from the angle of how does remote work affect collaboration.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. If not, I do want to be respectful of your time, and we're getting close to 1, so I want to make sure we don't keep you too long. So I don't know if you have anything to add. If not, we can probably end the broadcast.
I can briefly approach this question, but I would say that remote work, it's still sort of a new thing for everyone, and we're still trying to learn what works, and we haven't done enough A/B testing for this. Fivetran has, even if last year was a really difficult year from a company perspective, we have continued to expand our company. We double our headcount from a little over 200 to almost 600 people now. We double our revenue. So I definitely think remote work is not an enemy of productivity. On the other hand, I also see a lot of value in in-person collaboration, because a lot of times it's difficult to share your idea and having a spontaneous conversation that spark ideas. So
Yeah.
I think because sometimes there's that FaceTime running into someone in a hallway and get their buy-in on something and immediately, I think there's a lot of value there. Because of that, our leadership in our company is still embracing an in-person culture, or give employees the flexibility to work remote, but also give everyone a platform to come in a couple days a week to collaborate in person. And I think we'll have a better answer probably in a year or two after we do some more experiment and do some A/B testing to see what works more.
Yeah, we need more data. That's what I'm hearing. Yeah. I think that's a valid call. I think we all need a little more information. We need to see what it's like when we actually have the option to stay home versus being forced to. So I agree. All right. Well, I think the questions have wrapped up. So thank you so much, Veronica. If you've got nothing else to add and no one has any other questions, I will thank you guys all for joining us, and I will see you guys next time.
See you all. Feel free to connect to me and Ben on LinkedIn to stay in touch.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. If you need to find Veronica, please do find her. I did link her link in the description of this video. So please feel free to connect with her and me. And we'll see you guys next time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, she